Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about dependencies. So I'm not going to talk about what dependencies to use. This is a little bit more high level. You know, sort of the process of trying to select a dependency for your app. And it's a balancing act. And that's it. Nah, I'm going to go more in depth. So I work for ANZ as an iOS engineer. But I also have my own app that I've been working on for a few years. This is basically a sort of a widget-based app which allows you to display various things from your HomeKit devices and, you know, create and configure widgets, lock screen widgets, Apple Watch, complications, etc., interactive widgets and whatnot. So it's on iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, and also Mac Catalyst. So yeah, let's kick it off. So dependencies nowadays, that's something that you really need, right? Like maybe in a very distant past, you could just build everything from the scratch, just, you know, code everything, like think on the very old days, like the punching cards. But nowadays, that's impossible. It will be insane. So you do always depend on someone else's code. And that really brings a whole bunch of great advantages, right? Because it does help you to accelerate your development, writing your code. It helps you to reduce the complexity that you need to, you know, face when you're trying to do something new. Because you can focus at the problem at hand and maybe not be distracted and waste your time trying to get something working. If they're well written, they can help you to improve performance, and they can also help you to improve security and reliability, right? So think in any of the cryptographic libraries, right, or SSL, nobody in their sane mind will try to implement them themselves. So things have been developed for years and years. But you notice that there are a few stars in there. That is because it's not all happy days, you know, everybody dancing and, you know, all stars and flowers. So they come also with a bit of a baggage. They can be a liability for you as well. And the same way they can help you, they can actually introduce vulnerabilities. They can reduce your performance when they're poorly written or if they are too heavy or they're doing too much. They can add complexity when they are too opinionated, and we're going to touch on that later. They can introduce bugs in your app, and they can even make it crash. But I never seen that in my life. I'm lying. I have seen it quite a few times. Anyone have issues with that? Yeah, so on. I remember back in the day, Facebook was one that brought our app down, the Facebook SDK. Yeah, so that definitely happens. So yeah, they access to everything you have in your app, right? So you need to be very careful to see what they access into. They could potentially share your even PII data. And to me, this summarizes everything. They take control of your own destiny, right? So what we do? Do we use third-party libraries? How many do we use? We don't use them? Well, it depends. That's my managers and people that I had a lot of times when they ask me, how hard is to fix this? It depends. My wife also loves that when she asks me, can you fix this? Depends. So, yeah. Anyways, so it's actually a very delicate balance that you really want to achieve. So on one side, let's say you have infinite time, money, resources, you build everything yourself, you have full control. On the other side, you don't have control at all, you're just connecting and wiring things, just third-party code, and really bad things can happen. So we want to be, as anything in life, the sanity is in the middle. So I normally go about a process myself when I try to select any library. And what I do is I just go through a series of steps and just trying to, ask myself a bunch of questions, and that's what I want to sort of propose to you today. So first thing, before you want to add the library, there are a whole bunch of questions you need to ask yourself. After that, we go into research mode, right? We find different alternatives. We try to investigate each one, see if they make sense or not. And the final step, right before doing the final integrations, is just do like a test drive. See how it works. Quick integration. It will give you an opportunity to test a few things. And of course, things you might go into the previous step. If something doesn't work, you might pick a different library. So what we're going to be exploring in detail on this talk is each one of the steps. So before you add the library, the first question is, do you really need it? Maybe what you need to do is way too small. Maybe you're not understanding the problem. So it's always worth just to sit a little bit, understand what is what you need to do. Maybe the first Googling result, when you do just try to find, maybe it's not going to help you. So resist that impulse of saying, oh, I'm just going to get it quickly. Off I go. So that's very important. Also understanding the benefits and drawbacks, right? Because that decision is going to have consequences. And of course, trying to ponder on the risks that you are introducing. Sometimes it's just simple enough that you can just build it yourself. Like it's just been very famous cases. I don't know so much on the iOS community, but I remember one on the JavaScript community where there was, I think it was a library that was doing capitalizing or something like that with string, and it got removed and it brought down half of the web apps in the internet. And it's just something very simple. Why not you just build it yourself? It's a good opportunity to learn how to do it. And if you're working on a team, you can just socialize. Maybe someone has a few ideas how to do it. Of course, it's very important to try to understand how complex it's going to be, because you might end up going down a rabbit hole. So trying to do a good estimation, understanding if you will really be able to do it, is always a great idea. Maybe the OS already offers a solution. How many times, you're just doubling up on stuff that is already provided by some of the frameworks that iOS offers. So it offers like a whole bunch of, like a plethora of toolkits and frameworks. So it's always a good idea just to stop and just have a look, see if there is anything we can use. They are very, very easy to integrate normally, and they maintained by Apple. And most of the cases, they ready for the latest version of the OS. So that's not going to be stopping you to adopt all the latest and greatest that it gets released. And of course, it has less chances of affect the size of your app, because it's all in many cases they are the YDL libraries that are already coming with the system. But you always need to consider any privacy implications. So once we've made the call, right, we need to find a library. It's not in the OS. I can't build it myself. So we start looking into different alternatives. So we want to know first that the library and the authors are reputable, and they have a whole bunch of good reputation in the internet, right? So we check the authors. We want to make sure that this library is widely used. There's maybe not something really new that not many people is using. If it's an open source, that's a plus, because we can then go and investigate all of the issues that have been opened. We can check stars on GitHub and see if they have frequent releases. Is it being maintained actively? Maybe it was just abandoned. So you don't want to have something like that. It's like a really bad decision, because then you sort of you have a baggage, and as I said, a nasty liability because it's forgotten. So make sure it supports new OS versions. make sure also if you happen to be tied to a minimum OS version, you also want to check that that works and that is supported. Excuse me. And also we want to check that is maintained and that we see frequent releases with clear, release notes. Do they use native technologies? How many of you is using some cross-platform stuff in here? No one? Okay. Look, I'm a big fan of native technologies. I respect that some people like and having it to use cross-platform, and I guess in a way it kind of applies also to cross-platform, right? But you really want to be talking on the same language that the OS provides in terms of when you're doing library, right? So I would say if you were using React Native, you kind of want to be talking the same language like JavaScript, right? In my case, my first preference is native, right? So you do want to keep that working, right? So UI libraries definitely make sure that they use all of the native and even the vanilla components, right? They might be drawing on themselves, maybe using core graphics and stuff like that. Yeah, that works, but you're losing all of the advantages of the vanilla control. So if, let's say, we got a new iOS 7 situation when all of the controls change, you need to now just run and just get the library updated and everything. Accessibility gets a lot easier, and also as it gives you a very uniform interface. Prefer that they are developed in Swift, right? Because the integration is going to be a lot easier. There's less chance that there are some performance issues. And if you're using CI/CD, it will integrate really easy. And it will integrate really easy with the platform as well. It will be easy to write unit tests and wrap it. So is it too opinionated? I like to be opinionated, and I am opinionated. I don't like the libraries that I want to use to be too opinionated because they clash with my opinions. And then we don't move, right? We can't work, right? Because when you have too many opinions on your app, it's just a mess. So we don't want that. So one of the main problems, if you have a library that is too opinionated, there is a really steep learning curve, a lot of work to trying to understand it. There are many places where things can go wrong because it gets too much in your app in many points. And of course, they might be requiring early initialization and just get the clause all over your app, right? That's something that you probably want to steer away if you can. How much control they take from you. So this is pretty much expanding on what I was saying before. Those sort of apps that initiate very early, they want to override default app lifecycle events, like things like background and foreground events, or take control of your task or operation, background task operations, notifications, tip links. That can be really, really dangerous because it's a recipe for nasty crashes along the way. So you always wanted to have it isolated in one place if you do really need to use a library, and make sure that you are in control of your app. Again, same thing for UI, right? You don't want a library that takes full control of presentation and stuff like that. You want to control that. And to me, this is something very important, right? Whatever access that library has, whatever access your app, whatever access your app has, the library also has, right? So anything that is in your app, that, let's say, any PII that you're trying to access or any data you're storing, potentially that library can see it and potentially could share it. So it's very important to be aware of that. So if the library is open source, as I said, that's a big plus. You can check for whether they're doing Switzerland, weird things, if they are overriding default behavior, whether they're trying to send some data to third parties. If they try to use any of the private APIs, you don't want to get in trouble with Apple because of a dependency you don't know what it's doing. Check if they're trying to persist data locally, what they're doing, are they encrypting, not encrypting, if they're trying to read the keychain, if they're just trying to access stuff you have stored in there. If you can see the code quality, that's also great. It sort of gives you an idea of how much care the author puts in it, like if they have tests and stuff like that. And checking the license is always very important, just to try to understand what is that you are subscribing to. If the library offers some support, it's important just to have a look, see if you might be able to take advantage of that. You might be able to pay for that if you're working for a company. Maybe you might be advising your managers to that, just to help to get that support that you might need eventually. So what sort of support channels, if they're responsive or not when you try to open issues on GitHub, if there is a community, if they are engaged. Also how detailed they are on their release notes, because you get an idea of what's the engagement they have. And if there is a roadmap, right? Like what's the roadmap? If they're planning to deprecate and end of life that library, that's always not a good idea, as I said, to go with that. And of course, we want to know when there are upgrades. I think this is also a big important one. You need to think that when you have a privacy policy, you having a commitment with your clients, right? And if your library is breaking the privacy policy, you are breaking that commitment with your customers, right? So try to make sure you understand what's their privacy policy, how they store PII, if they do it, if they try to access it, and what data is being shared, things that I mentioned before, right? The data being encrypted. So at the end of the day, you don't want to have that sort of a liability being in your way. Okay, so once we have cleared out all the questions in terms of selecting the alternatives, we want to go now into running a bit of a spike. That's what I sort of call the test drive. So that gives you a more concrete idea, right? How, like, if they're telling the truth, if it integrates well. So you can look into security implications, maybe do scans. Some companies, they have like a proper security scan as part of the CI/CD, so you can just maybe create a quick branch, open a quick PR, and it will just give you a report. What's the integration method? Just try it. The complexity of the integration. So you might be reading all the documentation, but then you start finding into the nasty bits and pieces. Maybe it was really easy in the documentation, but then you start finding surprises along the way. Of course, if your app binary is gonna blow up, you definitely want to know it sooner than later. And it gives you the opportunity to write some tests, understand if there are memory leaks, if it has any performance issues or deadlocks. Okay, so when we are integrated, I personally prefer SPM. Many people still using CocoaPods, no, Cartridge. So yeah, definitely to me, I think that's kind of the standard now. So I tend to go with that. But then when you start writing your library, just using your library, the best way to go about it, in my opinion, is to wrap it and try to isolate it from the rest of the code in your app. So having some sort of a service that allows you to wrap that code and even maybe defining protocols that expose the functionality that it has, and then having a concrete service that access to that protocols that allows you to easily mock that and then have easy testing on that stuff. again, if your library is doing early initialization, maybe what you want to do is you want to have some sort of a lazy initialization if it's possible. And if you are able to have some sort of a remote switching or sort of a flags and stuff like that, if you are able to have something that it can have a kill switch on that library, that is definitely a plus, because you might find yourself that your app is crashing because of your library. So it will save your life. Okay, so that's the end of it. So the conclusion. It's always very, very important to do your proper research, understand and go through different alternatives, understand the implications, what is what you're committing to and what is you getting into. And if you have a team, if you work with people, communication is really important. So just talk to people. Maybe they might just suggest you a different idea. I always think that the best work you can do, you do it in a team of people. Like, you might be working on your own, but that sort of a collective mind really helps to get really good results. If you're working in a team, socialize your decision. Communicate also what did you came into, because then otherwise people is going to run into surprises. And finally, you need to own your decision. Right now, you're the responsible. You're the person who integrated that. So you gotta monitor, see. If your app is on the App Store, if your personal app, just check, see if you have crashes. That's now you need to be responsible for your decision. And that's it.
Any questions from the audience?
Thanks, Pablo. It's less of a question and more of a comment. I find that a lot of the time that I try to import a library, I actually need like a feature specific from the library. And license permitting and being open source, I find it sometimes easier to just integrate the part of the code that I need in my app and maintain it myself. I just find that that's important to think about if you can do that when you actually considering a library.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so definitely, I think that's basically in the theme of, or in the idea of, can you build it yourself? It's kind of that, right? And I would prefer that. If you understand well and you have a good idea of what the code is doing, why not to do that if you just need that piece of code? Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Have you had an horror story about integrating a library? If so, tell us. If not, yeah.
Look, back in the day when I was working for another company, as I said, we had to integrate the Facebook SDK because, business wanted to. And it's very hard to say no. And that brought a lot of pain because you don't have 100% control of what is going on underneath. And especially when you get these nasty crashes, which in this case the Facebook SDK was just initializing on the app did finish launching, so you would just open the app and it would crash. So I think that's one of the worst sort of the situations. Might have gotten better, I don't know, but I'm myself with my personal app, I try to steer away as much as I can from using third-party dependencies. Sometimes you do need to use them, right? And it's a legit reason why to, but yeah.
For example, actually there was one scenario for us, right? Like, we use the SDKs, right? But the SDK wasn't our issue from app, like similar what happened to Facebook, right? But when we try to check the log, we can't find the log, or no, their side can't find the log as well. How would you fix during that situations? Like, no one knows what it was the issue, because we know that we got the customer's feedback, right, telling that, hey, we got this crash. It's not look like crash, but the message is not sent. right? But they got the screenshot, and we can't resolve it because we are just using the SDKs, right? We are using the license, and we just provide the service to the customers. But there was no solution, and they also can't find, because we can't detect what time was the log is coming, because we can't get all the details from the SDK itself. How did you have similar issues?
I haven't found that often, but I think a best way about going about it is having a bit of telemetry in your app. So of course it might imply using a library, and you need to do your proper research, but having an idea of, you know, what's the flow that the users are trying to do and how they got themselves into that situation. And if you can reproduce something that also has helped me quite a bit in the past is, so Apple allows you to install profiles that enable certain login on your device. And then if you do a sick diagnose, and you look into the logs, device log, you can see more stuff that it might give you an idea of what is going on around, right? Like maybe a VPN, if you're using a VPN, maybe a VPN is just messing around with something. Maybe there's some weird networking traffic. Yeah.
Anything else?